Each encounter holds a hidden truth. Every investigation demands clarity. Empowering your legal rights, uncovering pure justice.
Stop right there. Do not move.
Excuse me. This is my home. Who are you?
Immigration and Customs Enforcement. You need to come with us now.
Do you have a warrant? You are on my private property.
Turn around. Hands behind your back. Now.
Mommy!
A black SUV with no markings rolled to a stop in a quiet Minnesota driveway at 7:43 in the morning. 4 doors opened at the same time. 4 agents stepped out at the same time. And a woman holding her 7-year-old son's hand on her own front steps had no idea that the next 4 minutes would change everything for all of them. 4 Immigration and Customs Enforcement agents believed they were acting on a credible tip. They had an address. They had a name. They had the kind of confidence that comes from years of operating without being held accountable. But when they walked up the driveway of Denise Richardson, a licensed attorney, a mother, and one of the most quietly dangerous legal minds in the state of Minnesota, they set into motion a chain of events that would end with all 4 of them facing federal criminal charges, their careers obliterated, and a $13.4 million verdict that would rewrite the rules of how federal agents can operate on American soil. If you are ready to see institutional racism taken down, like this video and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. And if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button right now because you won't want to miss tomorrow's story of cops messing with the wrong people and finding out. Let me know if you enjoyed the story. Let's continue. Now, the security cameras mounted on Denise Richardson's property captured everything, every second, every word spoken in her direction, every hand that touched her without her consent. These were not body cameras that could be switched off at the discretion of the agents wearing them. These were private, cloud-backed, motion-triggered systems installed on her own home, uploading footage in real time to a server no one on that driveway had the authority to access or erase. The agents did not know this when they arrived. They would not understand the weight of it until it was far too late. Denise Richardson was 44 years old. She had been a licensed attorney in the state of Minnesota for 11 years, having relocated from Texas, where she first built her reputation in civil rights law. In Texas, she had cut her teeth in advocacy circles that stretched back generations, rooms where the fight against institutional overreach was not abstract but inherited, passed from one lawyer to the next like a quiet inheritance. She carried that with her when she moved north, settling into a suburban home with her son, building a smaller practice, seeking something closer to stillness. But stillness, for someone like Denise Richardson, was never silence. She wrote, she filed. She published op-eds in regional papers and legal journals that named names and cited precedents and made people uncomfortable in the right rooms. She had become, over the course of several years, one of the more vocal critics of ICE enforcement practices in the Midwest. She was known. And in certain circles within federal law enforcement, she was resented. That Tuesday morning in early fall began the way most mornings did. Denise had been awake since before 6. Her son, a quiet and perceptive boy with his mother's sharp eyes, was dressed and eating breakfast by the time the kitchen light came on. She moved through the house with the practiced efficiency of a woman who had spent years managing both a legal practice and a household alone briefcase packed the night before, documents organized, jacket hanging by the door. By 7:35, she was locking up. By 7:40, she was on the front steps, her son's hand in hers, briefcase in the other, the morning air cold enough to see her breath. The walk to the car was supposed to take 20 seconds. It took less than 10 before the SUV appeared. The vehicle came in fast, too fast for a residential street at that hour, and pulled hard into the driveway with a sound that made the boy flinch. The engine cut. The doors opened. 4 agents emerged in a spread formation, and before Denise Richardson had finished turning toward the noise, the first of them was already shouting. The lead agent was a man in his late 40s, broad-shouldered, with 14 years inside Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and a file of internal complaints that had never once resulted in disciplinary action. He moved with the self-assured stride of someone who had never been meaningfully challenged. Behind him came a second agent, younger, mid-30s, with 5 years on the job, and a reputation among colleagues for following instructions without asking why. To the left, a woman in her early 40s, a 7-year veteran who had seen enough inside the agency to know when something felt wrong, but who had learned, over time, to keep that instinct buried. And at the rear, the youngest of the 4, 26 years old, barely 2 years into his career, still learning the shape of the work, and eager, above all, to belong. They did not announce themselves calmly. They did not present identification. They did not ask a single question before demanding compliance. The lead agent raised one hand in a sharp gesture and ordered Denise Richardson to stop moving, to turn around, to place her hands behind her back. His tone carried no uncertainty. It carried no courtesy. It carried the practiced authority of a man accustomed to being obeyed. Denise did not move. She stood at the top of her own porch steps, her son pressed against her side, and she did not move. Not out of confusion, not out of fear. She stood still because she was already calculating, already reading the situation with the precise, trained attention of someone who had spent over a decade understanding exactly where the law drew its lines and exactly when those lines were being crossed. These agents had no warrant. She could see that immediately. There was no paper in any of their hands, no document produced, no legal instrument offered. They had come to her home on a Tuesday morning without one. She was aware of the cameras. She had installed them herself 2 years prior, after receiving a series of threats that had shaken her enough to upgrade her home security system from a basic setup to something far more comprehensive. 4 exterior units, 2 angled directly at the driveway, all recording in high definition, all syncing wirelessly to encrypted cloud storage every 30 seconds. She did not need to look at them to know they were watching. She simply needed to make sure the agents did not look away from where they were standing. What happened next unfolded in under 3 minutes, and it was captured in its entirety. The lead agent closed the distance between them in 4 strides. The second agent moved to flank her on the other side. Denise Richardson, still holding her son's hand, turned her body slightly, not away from them, but toward the driveway camera, and she spoke, not loudly, not frantically. She stated, clearly and on the record, that she was a licensed attorney in the state of Minnesota, that she was standing on her own private property, that they had produced no warrant, that their presence constituted an unlawful entry. The lead agent did not respond to any of it. He moved behind her and seized her arm. The second agent took the other. They pulled her hands behind her back with a force that went well beyond what was necessary to secure compliance from a woman who had not resisted, had not lunged, had not raised her voice above a conversational register. The motion wrenched her shoulders. Her briefcase hit the ground, spilling papers across the concrete case files, notes, the careful work of months, scattered across the driveway like something discarded. Her son screamed. The sound cut through the quiet of that suburban street like a blade. He was 7 years old. He did not understand what was happening. He understood only that his mother's hand had been ripped from his, that men were forcing her to the ground in front of their own home, and that no one was stopping it. He screamed, and he kept screaming, and the sound of it carried down the block, through open windows, into the ears of neighbors who had been going about their own quiet mornings. Those neighbors came outside, one by one, some with phones already in hand. An older woman from the house directly across the street was the first to move. She crossed the road at a pace that surprised even herself, her face set with an expression that was not panic, but something harder, something closer to fury. She reached the boy and scooped him up, one arm under his knees, the other around his back, pulling him against her chest and away from the scene with a firmness that told him, without words, that he was safe now. She held him, and with her other hand she kept filming. Denise Richardson, handcuffed now, her shoulders aching from the force with which her arms had been pulled behind her, did not look at her son. She did not cry out. She turned her face toward the nearest camera and, in a voice that was steady and deliberate and recorded in perfect clarity, she stated the badge numbers of the agents standing in her driveway. 1 by 1. Each digit spoken with the same careful precision she would use in a courtroom. They put her in the back of the SUV, the door closed, the engine turned over. The vehicle pulled out of the driveway and onto the street, and for a moment the neighborhood was silent. Then the sound of it returned, the boys crying, quieter now but still there, muffled against the neighbor's shoulder, papers on the concrete, a briefcase on its side. The camera still recording, still uploading, still holding everything that had just happened in a format that could not be altered, could not be denied, and could not be made to disappear. Within 20 minutes, the first of the neighbor's videos was online. Within an hour, it had been shared 400 times. By midday, it had been viewed by hundreds of thousands of people who had never heard the name Denise Richardson and who, after that morning, would never forget it. The ice processing facility where Denise Richardson was taken sat in a nondescript building on the edge of a commercial district, the kind of structure designed to be overlooked. Gray exterior. No signage beyond a small placard by the entrance. Inside, the lighting was flat and unforgiving, and the room smelled of recycled air and industrial cleaner. It was, by design, a place where people were made to feel small. Denise Richardson did not feel small. She sat in a holding room for the better part of 2 hours before anyone spoke to her with anything resembling an official purpose. The lead agent, the 14-year veteran who had seized her arm on her own front steps, came in first, alone, and sat across from her with the kind of casual posture that was meant to communicate control. He did not read her anything. He did not offer her access to counsel. He began instead by asking questions about her nationality, her immigration status, and her place of birth, questions to which Denise Richardson provided no answers, not because she did not know them, but because she understood, with a clarity that the agent across from her entirely lacked, that she had no obligation to answer a single one of them. He pushed, she held. The second agent joined the room partway through. The tone shifted, less procedural, more contemptuous. They spoke about her as though she were not present, referencing the tip that had brought them to her address, dismissing her repeated invocations of her legal rights as performance, as theatrics, as something they had heard before from people who thought knowing the right words would protect them. One of them used a term spoken quietly, almost casually, as though it were an ordinary descriptor that was not a legal term at all. It was a slur, spoken in a room, spoken while she sat there. What they did not know, what none of them had thought to check, was that the smartwatch on Denise Richardson's left wrist was active. She had activated it in the back of the SUV, a single deliberate motion of her right thumb against the face of the device, pressing and holding the side button in a sequence she had practiced. The watch was paired to a secure recording application, one she had downloaded months earlier as a precautionary measure after receiving threats related to her public criticism of federal enforcement agencies. It recorded audio continuously, it time-stamped every second, and it uploaded, like her home security system, to cloud storage that existed entirely outside the reach of the men sitting across from her. Every word spoken in that room was being captured. Every slur, every admission about the basis or lack of basis for the tip, every moment in which they acknowledged, without realizing the significance, that they had acted on information so vague it could not withstand a single hour of scrutiny. The recording would later reveal that at no point during the interrogation did any of the agents produce documentation of the anonymous tip itself. They referenced it, they cited it as justification. But when pressed, and Denise pressed, quietly, repeatedly, in language that was precise and legally grounded, none of them could name a single verifiable detail it contained. Miles away, in the older neighbor's living room, a different kind of recording was taking shape. Denise's son sat on the sofa, wrapped in a blanket, his face still streaked with tears, clutching a worn stuffed animal to his chest. He was calm now, not the calm of someone who had recovered, but the calm of a child who had retreated somewhere inside himself, somewhere quiet and far from the driveway. The neighbor had given him juice, had turned on something familiar on the television, had done the things that adults do when they do not know what else to do. What neither of them knew was that the phone tucked into the pocket of the boy's jacket, an older device of Denise's, given to him months ago, was recording. Denise had set it up herself, quietly, after a series of late-night conversations with her own mother about the kind of world her son was growing up in. It was a child safety application, designed to activate automatically when the device detected elevated audio levels, a child's cry, a raised voice, anything that crossed a certain threshold. It recorded both audio and video from the phone's front-facing camera, and it saved the footage locally before syncing to the same encrypted cloud account Denise used for everything else. The app had activated the moment her son had screamed in the driveway. It had been recording ever since, capturing not only the chaos outside, but the quiet aftermath inside. A child's perspective. Unedited. Unmanipulated. A record of what it looked like, from the smallest vantage point in the room, when a mother was taken from her own home. Denise was released at 4:17 in the afternoon. The release was not a gracious act, it was a forced correction. Her legal network, a web of colleagues, former professors, and civil rights attorneys stretching back to her years in Texas, had been alerted within the first hour. Calls were made, emails were sent. Within 3 hours, 2 separate attorneys had contacted the facility demanding access to their client and demanding, in language that left no room for misinterpretation, an explanation for her detention. By the time the afternoon shift began, someone in the facility's chain of command had understood, with dawning and considerable alarm, exactly who they had in custody. Denise Richardson was not undocumented. She was not a flight risk. She was not, by any legal standard, a person who should have been detained at all. She was a United States citizen, born in Texas, licensed to practice law in Minnesota, and she was sitting in their holding room with a smartwatch full of evidence. She walked out of the building without comment. She did not speak to the press that had already gathered outside a small cluster at first, then a larger one, drawn by the videos that had been circulating since morning. She got into a car driven by a colleague, said very little on the ride, and did not speak again until she was holding her son. The reunion happened in the neighbor's living room, and it was not the kind of scene that belonged on a news broadcast. It was private. It was a mother on her knees, pulling a child into her arms, and the child burying his face in her neck, and neither of them saying anything at all for a long time. But the damage was visible not on the surface, not in any way a camera could capture, but in the way the boy flinched when the front door opened. In the way he would not, for weeks afterward, let her out of his sight. In the nightmares that began that night and did not stop for months. The trauma of that morning did not end when the SUV pulled out of the driveway. It settled into the house like weather, and it stayed. The federal investigation was launched within 48 hours. The viral footage had done what viral footage sometimes does. It made inaction impossible. The Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division opened a probe. The FBI was brought in to assess the conduct of the 4 agents, and within the first week of that investigation, 2 things became clear that would reshape the entire case. The first was the origin of the tip. Investigators traced the anonymous report back through layers of obfuscation, a burner email, a forwarded message, a chain of digital breadcrumbs that, when followed with patience and forensic rigor, led back to a single source. A former ICE insider, someone who had left the agency under pressure 2 years prior, after Denise Richardson had published a series of detailed exposés connecting specific units within ICE to patterns of misconduct. The tip was not intelligence, it was retaliation. It was a manufactured pretext designed to put Denise Richardson in a position where federal agents would show up at her home and do exactly what they had done. The second revelation came from inside the unit itself. The female agent, the 7-year veteran, the one who had stood to the left during the arrest and had, according to later accounts, expressed discomfort with the operation in private before it took place, made contact with federal investigators before the end of the first week. She cooperated fully. What she provided was not limited to the events of that single morning. She described a pattern. A culture, she said, within certain units of the agency in which vocal critics of enforcement practices were identified, discussed, and targeted. In which women of color activists, attorneys, journalists were disproportionately subjected to operations that were justified on paper, but motivated, in practice, by something far less defensible. She had seen it before, she had seen it happen to others, and she had, until that morning in Denise Richardson's driveway, kept silent about it. Now a question worth sitting with: should a warrantless arrest by a federal agent automatically trigger an independent investigation every single time, without exception? Because what happened in that driveway should not have required viral video and public outrage to prompt a federal probe. It should have been standard. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Type yes if you believe stricter oversight is overdue. Type no and explain your reasoning. And if this story has reached you the way it reached millions of others, share this video. Let someone else hear it. The investigation continued. The evidence mounted. And Denise Richardson, reunited with her son, but not yet finished, not even close to finished, began. Quietly and with the same deliberate precision she had brought to every other moment of this story, to move. Her legal network was only part of what she had built over the years. The other part, the part that no one in that driveway had seen, the part that even most of her colleagues did not know about, was her role as an undisclosed legal advisor to one of the largest civil rights organizations operating in the United States. It was not a public position. It was not listed on any website or mentioned in any of the op-eds she had published. She had held it for 4 years, working behind the scenes, reviewing cases, analyzing patterns of federal misconduct, and quietly assembling a body of evidence that, on its own, could implicate entire units within multiple agencies. She had done this work the way some people keep a journal steadily, privately, with no expectation that anyone would ever see it. Until now. The driveway had given her a reason to show it. The trial opened on a Monday in late spring, in a federal courtroom in Minneapolis that had seen its share of consequential cases, but few that carried the particular weight of this one. The gallery was full. The cameras were present, but restrained, permitted at a distance, their presence a concession to the public interest that had made this case impossible to ignore. Denise Richardson sat at the plaintiff's table with a stillness that had become, by this point, something close to signature. She had not come to this room to perform. She had come to let the evidence do what evidence does when it is allowed to speak without interference. The prosecution's case was built on 3 pillars, and each one, when it rose completely. The first was a smartwatch. The audio from Denise Richardson's recording device was entered into the public record on the second day of testimony, and it was played aloud in a courtroom that had, until that moment, operated largely on the basis of the agent's written accounts that had characterized the arrest as lawful, cooperative, and uneventful. The recording told a different story. It captured the lead agent referring to Denise Richardson using a racial slur, spoken casually and without apparent awareness that the word was being preserved. It captured a second agent describing the basis for the tip in terms that made clear they had not verified a single element of it before acting. It captured a conversation fragmented but unmistakable in which one of the agents referenced a pattern, a way of doing things, that suggested the operation in Denise's driveway was not an anomaly but a method. The courtroom did not react visibly, but the jury did not need to. The audio spoke for itself. The second pillar was the cooperating agent. She took the stand on the 4th day. Her testimony was not dramatic in the way that television courtroom scenes often are. There was no breakdown, no confession delivered in tears. What there was, instead, was a quiet and methodical account, delivered in a voice that was steady but not indifferent, of what she had witnessed over 7 years inside the agency. She described briefings in which certain individuals, public critics of ICE, activists, attorneys who had filed lawsuits, or published investigations were discussed by name. She described operations that were initiated not on the basis of intelligence, but on the basis of institutional grievance. She described a culture in which the youngest members of a unit were encouraged to document cases in ways that supported predetermined conclusions, and in which questioning that culture was understood to be a career risk. She had not come forward sooner, she said, because she had not believed anyone would listen. The viral footage had changed that calculation. The third pillar was the youngest agent, the 26-year-old who had stood at the rear of the formation in Denise's driveway, who had been 2 years into his career and had wanted, more than almost anything, to be accepted by the people around him. He did not testify on the stand. What he did, instead, was provide a written statement reviewed and verified by his own attorney, in which he admitted that he had added details to the official tip report that had not been present in the original anonymous communication. Minor details, specific enough to make the report appear credible, fabricated entirely at the implicit encouragement of the lead agent to give the operation a paper foundation it did not otherwise have. It was this confession, quiet, almost apologetic in its tone, that sealed the case for the others. But the moment that reshaped the trial entirely came when Denise Richardson's legal team introduced evidence that had not been part of the public record until that point. It was not the smartwatch audio. It was not the home security footage. It was something older and something far more consequential, a body of documentation assembled over 4 years of quiet, meticulous work by a woman who had been, without anyone in that courtroom fully understanding it, one of the most strategically positioned legal minds in the country. Her role as advisor to the Civil Rights Organization had given her access to case files, internal communications, and patterns of conduct that, taken together, painted a picture of systemic abuse that extended far beyond the 4 agents sitting at the defense table. The evidence connected them, not speculatively, but through documented correspondence and verified timelines to a broader network of operations that had been conducted with the same reckless disregard for constitutional protections. Denise Richardson had not waited for that driveway to begin building this case. She had been building it for years. The arrest had simply given her a reason to open the door. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. 4 hours was, by the standards of federal civil rights cases, extraordinarily fast. It suggested not a close decision, but a clear one, a jury that had listened to the evidence, understood its implications, and reached a conclusion that required very little debate. The verdict, when it came, was unanimous on every count. All 4 agents were found guilty of deprivation of rights under color of law. The lead agent and the second agent were found guilty of assault. All 4 were found guilty of false imprisonment. The cooperating agent's testimony and the youngest agent's confession had not saved them from the verdict. They had, in a sense, guaranteed it by making the full scope of the misconduct undeniable. Sentencing followed 3 weeks later, in the same courtroom, before the same judge, a woman in her late 50s who had spent 22 years on the federal bench and who had, over the course of this trial, listened to testimony and evidence with an attention that had left very little room for ambiguity about where she stood. The lead agent received 5 years in federal prison. The second agent received 3 years and 6 months. The cooperating agent, whose testimony had been critical to the prosecution's case, received 18 months of supervised release and no prison time, though her career, like all of theirs, was finished. The youngest agent received 2 years of probation. His confession had been taken into account. His youth had been taken into account. But the confession had also been the thing that made the fabrication of the tip report an established fact, and that fact carried its own weight regardless of the age of the person who admitted to it. All 4 lost their federal employment. All 4 lost their pensions. The judge, in her sentencing remarks, did not soften her language. She described what had happened in Denise Richardson's driveway not as an error in judgment, but as a violation of the law, of the Constitution, and of the trust that federal authority requires in order to function. The civil suit was resolved in the same month. Denise Richardson had filed suit against the United States government and the relevant departments months before the criminal trial concluded, and the case had moved through discovery and negotiation with a thoroughness that left very little for the government's legal team to contest. The evidence was the same evidence that had convicted the agents. The harm documented in psychological evaluations, in the testimony of Denise's son, in medical records that traced the physical injuries sustained during the arrest was substantial and ongoing. The boy testified in a proceeding that was conducted with every accommodation the court could offer about what he remembered, about waking up in the dark and not knowing where he was, about not wanting to go outside, about the sound of a car door and what it now made him feel. The judge awarded $13,400,000. It was a figure that drew headlines, that became a data point in arguments about federal accountability, that was cited in the months and years that followed as evidence that the system could, under the right conditions, produce consequences that matched the severity of the harm. But for Denise Richardson, the number was secondary. What mattered, what she said, in the quiet interviews she gave in the weeks after the verdict, mattered was not the money, it was the record. The documented, permanent, publicly accessible record of what had happened in her driveway and why, and of the institutional failures that had made it possible. She did not disappear after the verdict. She spoke at panels. She testified before congressional committees considering legislation on immigration enforcement oversight. She worked with policy organizations to draft proposals, mandatory warrant requirements for home-adjacent operations, independent review boards for tip-based actions, bias training protocols with teeth. Her Texas roots drew her back, periodically, to the civil rights networks where she had first learned that the law was not a shield but a tool, and that tools were only as effective as the hands that wielded them. She wielded hers with the same quiet precision she had brought to every other moment of this story. Years passed. The driveway in suburban Minnesota was repaved. The cameras remained. They were upgraded, in fact, newer models, higher resolution, the same cloud backup system, the same 30-second sync interval. Denise Richardson had not removed them. She had not moved. The house was still hers, and the neighborhood was still quiet. And on most mornings, the routine was the same as it had always been: coffee, briefcase, the small rituals of a life that had been interrupted once and had, through the slow and unglamorous work of documentation and persistence, been restored. But it was not the same morning. It could not be. The driveway carried something now that no amount of repaving could remove: a memory, recorded and preserved and made permanent, of what happened when power assumed it would not be watched, and of what happened when it was. Justice, in this story, was not a single moment. It was not the verdict or the check or the sentencing remarks of a federal judge. It was the accumulation of everything that led to those things: the smartwatch, the cameras, the phone in a boy's jacket pocket, the years of quiet work by a woman who understood that truth does not need volume to endure. It only needs to be kept. And it was kept.
If you like this video, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next story. Share this video with someone who would appreciate it, and let's keep building this community together. And before you go, drop a comment below. I'd love to hear your thoughts on what stood out to you the most. Until next time, stay safe, stay curious, and I'll see you in the next.
Fairness is an enduring mission, and insight serves as your safeguard. Thank you for watching and advocating for absolute clarity.